I woke up to strangers parking on my dead uncle's butterfly sanctuary. The HOA president called it community cooperation. So I buried strips in the grass and rigged cameras to catch every tire pop, scream, and illegal sign she planted. By sunrise, my quiet meadow became a revenge maze, and Karen's minions walked right into the trap. Here's how I turned an HOA power grab into their $1,200 mistake. 6 months. That's how long it took Karen to notice the one patch of grass she couldn't control, my inheritance from the only family who ever stuck around. I was sipping coffee in my boxers halfway through a bacon sandwich when a beige minivan barreled across my side yard and parked right on top of my wildflower patch. The driver, a woman in leopard print sunglasses, popped out, waved at me like I was the valet, and hollered, "Karen said this is fine." I blinked, mouth full of bread and rage, stared at the dented hood now crushing what used to be my uncle's butterfly sanctuary. That was the moment I knew I was declaring war. My late Uncle Ray left me everything: the house, the barn, fields, and the little slice of unpaved lot next to the house that I figured I'd eventually turn into a workshop. Until then, it was a peaceful little meadow with waist high grass, wild flowers, and a few garden gnomes Uncle Ray insisted kept deer away. I didn't mind the neighbors at first, even though they all looked like they'd been copy pasted from a Sunday Home Depot flyer. Then came Karen. Karen, the HOA president, had that tight-lipped smile that looked like it took effort not to hiss. I first met her when she knocked on my door holding a welcome basket that smelled like air freshener and judgment. She told me she was so glad a real homeowner finally moved in after Ray, and that she looked forward to collaborating on community standards. I nodded politely and closed the door the second she mentioned compliance. For the first few months, I didn't hear much from her except the occasional circulars taped to my door, HA updates, gardening tips, and one passive aggressive flyer about yard conformity. But then I noticed a pattern. Every weekend, strange cars started showing up not in front of houses, but on my lot. At first, I thought they were turning around or maybe lost. But when I saw tire tracks carving paths into my grass, and the telltale glint of fast food trash wedged in the brush, I realized something wasn't right. I confronted the first guy I saw. He was wearing a visor and khakis and holding a foil casserole dish. I asked him why he was parked there. He just said, "Karen told us to park in the overflow lot." This is the overflow, right? I told him it wasn't. He squinted at me like I was a speed bump in his weekend and walked off without even a sorry. That same evening, I found a sign staked into the edge of my lot: HOA guest parking, temporary, in Comic Sans, no less. It had duct tape on one side and a smiley face drawn in the corner. That's when I realized Karen had officially lost her mind. The next morning, I yanked the sign out and tossed it in the trash. 3 hours later, another one appeared, laminated this time and zip tied to a solar light. I was dumbfounded. It was like playing whack-a-mole with entitlement. I tried talking to Karen. She smiled and said, "You weren't using it, and it's better this way. Keeps the street clear. Besides, it looks like part of the common lot." I explained it was private property. She said, "Well, we can always discuss a shared usage agreement." I was done discussing. Over the next week, more and more cars rolled in. Some were half on a sidewalk, others 2 feet in from my fence. One person opened their trunk and started changing a baby on the grass like it was a picnic. My land was turning into a suburban truck stop. I posted a sign that said private property and no parking. The next morning, it had been flipped around with "just kidding" written on the back in permanent marker. One afternoon, I came home and found a deep oil stain in the grass, color of old coffee. A giant SUV had leaked something nasty that soaked into the roots of the only patch of native plants Uncle Ray had been proud of. That oil wasn't just killing wildflowers, it was erasing the last patch of land where Ray taught me constellations. That's when I lost it, stomped over to Karen's house, and banged on her door. She opened it with a mock surprised expression and an apron covered in flour. "I've told you that's my land." You can't just, she cut me off with a long sigh and said, "Oh, let's not make this about territory. This community is about cooperation. It's not like you're doing anything with it." I stared at her, words caught behind a wall of disbelief and fury. I turned and walked back to my place without another word. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a beer. I started drawing plans. Not for a garage, not for a workshop, for revenge. It started with research. I looked up zoning laws, property boundaries, easement rights. Everything was in my favor. Uncle Ray had never been part of the HOA, and neither was I. That lot was legally mine, with no shared access, no agreements, no exceptions. I pulled up satellite photos from the county records, printed them out, and pinned them to my corkboard like I was hunting a fugitive. Ray's old whiskey glass left a ring on the zoning maps. Felt like he was cheering me on. Then I made a trip to the supply store 3 towns over. The kind of place that sells things by the pound and smells like diesel and pine. I didn't ask for help, knew what I was looking for. By the time I got home, the back of my truck was loaded with 2 trail cams, a roll of pressure-sensitive spike mats, motion lights, and a no trespassing sign that didn't mess around. By 3 a.m., I'd turned Ray's sanctuary into something he'd never recognize, a war zone dressed as a meadow. I installed the spike mats beneath a layer of turf that looked like it belonged in a golf commercial. I rigged the trail cams to upload straight to my phone. I set up motion lights angled like stage spotlights. I even tested the whole system using a wheelbarrow. When it rolled over the spikes, they hissed up like metal porcupines. Beautiful. But would $200 of hardware really stop someone who thought rules didn't apply? I went to bed with a smile on my face, dreaming of Karen's streak when the first tire hissed flat. The morning after I laid down my arsenal of deterrents, I woke up earlier than usual, coffee already brewing before the sun had fully crept over the tree lean. I sat in my favorite chair facing the lot, anticipation buzzing like static in the back of my mind. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 8:13 a.m., a silver BMW with tinted windows rolled up, hesitated for a second like a dog sniffing unfamiliar ground, then committed and pulled right into the middle of the lot. I could almost hear the conversation in the car. Karen said it was fine again. Like that woman's word was the 10 Commandments carved into HOA stone. The car eased into a grassy patch where I'd planted the first spike mat. The front wheels dipped ever so slightly and then hissed. A long, angry hiss like a snake declaring war. The driver's door flung open, and out jumped a man in slacks and a Bluetooth headset, hopping around like the grass had turned into lava. He stared at his deflating tire, eyes wide with disbelief. I leaned back, clicked a button on my phone, and watched the scene again in real time on the trail cam feed. Beautiful. Absolutely cinematic. The man pulled out his phone and paced in tight circles, clearly calling someone. 30 minutes later, Karen showed up. She marched toward the lot in a lemon yellow windbreaker and that ever present aura of someone who thought the world needed her permission to rotate. She didn't look surprised at the flat tire. Instead, she looked furious, not at me for setting a trap, but at the audacity of reality for catching her in a lie. I stepped outside casually, coffee in hand, camera feed still live on my phone. Karen stormed up to me and jabbed a finger toward the lot. "What did you do?" I raised my eyebrows, as innocent as I could fake. "Secured my private property. It's not a parking lot. It's never been a parking lot. You can't put traps on land people are using." "You mean trespassers on my land?" "Yes, actually, I can. And I put up warning signs." She spun around and scanned the area. I had purposely made the signs just slightly hidden enough to be legally present, but not obvious to the lazy or entitled. She found one and shrieked when she saw the bold print. "Private property. Spike strips in use. Trespassers assume all risk." Beneath it was a QR code linking to a Google Drive folder titled HOA Karen Parking Chronicles. I added that touch the night before for flair. "I'm going to report you," she said, her voice climbing to the octave of a haunted tea kettle. Please do. I'll bring the footage. The police love clear documentation. She stared at me like I just slapped her with a rolled up HOA rulebook. Then she turned on her heel and dragged the BMW man into a heated whisper argument, her finger wagging in his face like a malfunctioning metronome. I retreated inside and watched the rest unfold on camera. A tow truck eventually came, and Karen hovered like a gargoyle the entire time, flapping her hands and trying to block the camera's view. Too late. Every pixel was recorded. Later that afternoon, I received a surprise in the form of an envelope tucked under my doormat. Inside was a letter on official-looking HOA letterhead with Karen's signature at the bottom. It claimed I was being fined $1,200 for creating unsafe conditions, violating community harmony, and unauthorized installation of hazardous devices. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my sandwich. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property, and Karen knew it. This was an intimidation tactic as lazy as it was illegal. I snapped a photo of the letter, uploaded it to the HOA Karen Parking Chronicles folder, and sent a copy to my lawyer friend Jen. She called me back an hour later, laughing. "This is adorable," she said. "Keep everything. Screenshot, date stamp, back it all up. If she escalates, she's just digging her own hole." Encouraged, I decided to double down. I went back to the supply store and picked up 2 more spike mats and upgraded my trail cams with voice intercoms. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and the lot turned gold in the fading light, I installed the upgrades. Each spiked strip now had motion detection. If someone got too close, the system would activate a pre-recorded message that said, "You are trespassing on private property. Please exit immediately. This area is under surveillance." Around 9 p.m., the system got its first test. A white pickup rolled slowly into the lot. Lights off, engine idling. Someone got out and laid down a flattened cardboard box, clearly trying to cover the spikes. He walked back toward the truck to guide it forward when the intercom blared, "You are trespassing on private property." The man jumped back like he'd been shot, looking around in panic. He scrambled back into the driver's seat, hit reverse, and peeled out, knocking over one of Karen's makeshift guest parking signs on the way. The camera caught everything. I added the clip to the digital archive and labeled it Late Night Dummy with Cardboard Edition. The next morning, Karen knocked on my door. I didn't open it, just watched through the peephole as she held up a letter and waved it like a flag. She eventually taped it to my door and left in a huff. I waited until she was gone, then peeled it off. Another bogus HOA fine, this time claiming I owed $2,500 for willful hostility to the community and creating a psychologically unsafe environment. That last one made me laugh out loud. I forwarded the letter to Jen, who told me she'd already contacted the real county office and confirmed my land was independently zoned and explicitly excluded from HOA oversight. My legal footing was rock solid. By now, the whole neighborhood was watching. Some residents slowed down as they passed, others peeked through blinds, and a few even walked their dogs a little slower to get a better look at my lot. One guy actually gave me a thumbs up from across the street. I figured he was tired of Karen too. That night, I added floodlights. Bright ones. I rigged them to trigger if any car entered the lot, lighting it up like a prison yard. With every upgrade, my property became less of a target and more of a warning. The line had been drawn. Karen had trespassed, ignored the law, and now she was reaping the rewards. I was done playing defense, and somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly, but that was fine. I had time, cameras, and spike strips. Let her come. 3 nights after the floodlights went in, I was woken up by a faint clicking noise outside. Soft, rhythmic, like someone tapping metal on pavement. I slipped out of bed, heart already pounding, and checked the live feed on my phone. One of the motion-activated trail cams had triggered, and what I saw made my blood pressure spike like the traps buried in my lawn. Two figures were creeping across the lot, one crouched low with a flashlight, the other dragging what looked like a sheet of plywood. They were covering the spikes again. But this time, it wasn't just an attempt to park. They were tampering with the setup, clearly trying to dismantle or neutralize what I had built. They worked slowly, cautiously, whispering and pointing toward the motion lights overhead. That's when I hit the speaker button on the camera and said the same pre-recorded line I'd used before, but this time I followed it up live with a far less friendly tone. This is private property. I've already filed a trespass report. Smile for the cops. They bolted, dropped the plywood, and ran like kids caught egging a house. One of them tripped, hit the turf hard, and scrambled back up, limping into the night. I zoomed in on the footage and paused. The flash of blonde hair, the pink hoodie, it was Karen's niece, the same woman I'd seen at HOA meetings bragging about getting special access to neighborhood perks. She must have thought the lot was a bonus feature that came with her aunt's imaginary title of Land Queen. By morning, I had 3 different angles of the attempted sabotage, all timestamped and clear as day. I packaged the clips into a folder titled Karen's Nightcrawlers and backed it up in 3 locations, just in case. I'd been playing defense long enough. Now it was time to strike back. Not with more traps or sarcasm, something far more painful to people like Karen. Official records. I drove to the county assessor's office that afternoon and asked for every document related to my land and the HOA's boundary lines. The clerk, a guy with a mustache that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s, handed over a thick folder after checking my ID. Inside were survey maps, original plats, and a certified zoning exclusion signed years ago when the subdivision was first built. My lot had never been part of the HOA. It wasn't even adjacent to the shared community areas. It had its own parcel listed under rural fringe. Not only that, but I found a clause that explicitly prohibited the HOA from extending usage rights onto adjacent properties without written agreement from the owner. That was the final nail in Karen's fantasy coffin. Armed with the paperwork, I returned home and drafted my own letter on real legal letterhead this time, thanks to Jen. It was direct, clear, and packed with legal citations. I printed out copies, one for Karen, each HOA board member, and one for the sheriff's office. I even mailed one to myself for the record old-fashioned way. By the next day, Karen had a certified letter in hand stating in no uncertain terms that any further unauthorized use of my property would be met with immediate legal action. She didn't take it well. Within hours, another violation notice appeared on my door. This one absurd beyond belief. It accused me of emotional terrorism, weaponized lighting, and creating a visual hazard for drivers due to excessive illumination. I read it twice just to make sure it was real. It had HOA stamps and everything, but I knew it was garbage. I called Jen, and she practically snorted on the phone. "That's not even a thing," she said. She's grasping at imaginary straws. It's almost sad. Almost. That evening, I got another visitor, but this one wasn't hostile. It was Richard, Karen's neighbor on the other side. He was an older guy with a calm voice and the kind of politeness that felt genuine. He knocked gently and asked if I had a minute. "I just want to say," he began, glancing toward Karen's house, "that not all of us agree with what she's doing. Most of us think it's insane. I've lived here 20 years. Your uncle was a good man. Quiet, respectful. Karen's the one stirring trouble." I thanked him and offered a seat on the porch. We talked for nearly an hour. He told me Karen had only become HOA president after the last one moved to Florida and she'd run unopposed. Since then, she'd treated the job like she was crowned queen of the zip code. She'd fine people for having flower pots that didn't match, threatened kids for sidewalk chalk, and once tried to shut down a lemonade stand run by twin 7-year-olds because they hadn't filled out a beverage permit. "She thinks she's doing everyone a favor," Richard said, shaking his head. "But really, we're all just waiting for her to slip." I grinned. "Well, I think she just did." The very next day, my cameras caught another infraction, but this one was different. It wasn't a guest or relative. It was Karen herself. She pulled up to my lot in her Lexus SUV, parked halfway over the curb, and stepped out carrying a large signpost and a hammer. She began pounding it into the ground right next to my freshly placed private property sign. The new sign read, Temporary Event Parking, HOA Authority, Code 3.2.1. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean. Probably made up on the spot. But this time, I didn't yell, didn't storm out. I just hit record and let her do her thing. She stayed for 5 minutes, hammering, straightening, posing like she was planting a flag on the moon. Once she left, I walked out, unscrewed her sign from the stake, and carefully laid it down beside the mailbox. I replaced it with one of my own. This said in large black letters on a red background, Trespassing on this land is a crime. Cameras active. Violators will be prosecuted. I mounted it on a steel pole sunk 2 feet into concrete. No more zip ties. No more cardboard comedy. That night, as the cicadas buzzed in the trees and stars blinked into existence, I reviewed the footage again. I clipped the best parts together, Karen's sneaky sign installation, the nighttime plywood fumble, the over-the-top violation letters, and added captions. I called it the HOA Files, Episode 1. I didn't post it publicly yet, but I was ready because Karen wasn't backing down. She was escalating, and now with proof in hand and the neighborhood slowly turning against her, I was no longer defending my land. I was preparing to take hers. Turns out, I'd underestimated how far she'd go to save face and what I'd risk to end this. The sun was barely up when I got the email from Jen titled, "You'll Like This." Attached was a scanned letter from the county zoning office confirming what we already knew, but now in fully notarized bureaucratic glory. My land, including the so-called guest parking lot, had been designated as private, independent of all HOA boundaries since the neighborhood was first planned. The plat map was clear. No easements, no shared access, no possibility of reclassification without my signature. Jen added a short message beneath it. Want to shut her up permanently? This goes public today. I printed 3 copies and drove straight to the HOA board meeting scheduled that morning. Karen, predictably, hadn't mentioned I'd be attending. She liked to run the board like a courtroom where she was judge, jury, and offended witness. But when I walked into the community hall with a folder under my arm, heads turned. Whispers floated through the air like birds suddenly startled off a wire. Karen was already at the podium, wearing a lavender blazer like she was about to cut a ribbon in a shopping mall. She froze when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked too loudly. I smiled and replied, "Yes, actually. I'm here to help everyone." Before she could object, I walked to the table and handed documents to each board member. Richard, who'd given me the heads up weeks ago, gave me a discreet nod as he skimmed the first page. I waited in silence as their eyes moved across the maps and legal statement. Then I pulled out my phone and played a short video Karen installing the fake event parking sign while muttering something about putting him in his place. The audio was crystal clear. One board member looked like she bit the inside of her cheek to stop herself from laughing. Another sighed and leaned back like a man realizing he'd bought a lemon. Karen snapped, "That video was taken without permission. It's illegal. This man is harassing me, and he's threatening our peaceful community." I held up the zoning confirmation. "According to this, I am not part of your community. I've never signed an HOA agreement, and your association has no legal authority over my land, which means every fake fine, every trespass, every threat, and especially every attempt to co-opt my lot as parking was illegal. You've opened your board up to liability." The room went silent. One of the board members, a woman named Celeste, who'd always looked exhausted every time Karen spoke, cleared her throat and said, "I think we need to take this seriously. If this is true, and it looks like it is, then Karen overstepped." "Overstepped," I repeated, laughing. She had people digging in my yard and starting fires. Karen blanched. That was a misunderstanding. No, that was arson, I replied, and I have the footage. Want to see it? Richard stood. I move that the board formally investigate these claims and consider disciplinary action against Karen. Celeste quickly added, I second. Karen sputtered, waving her arms. This is ridiculous. I've served this HOA with dignity for years. This is just some new guy trying to undermine community values. Another member quietly muttered, You tried to find a man for installing solar lights. Karen, come on. The vote was called 4-1 in favor of the motion to investigate. Karen was the one vote against. She stood in stunned silence as the meeting moved on without her. I left as soon as the decision was made, but I didn't miss the look she gave me, like a snake backed into a corner. That evening, I was in my garage sorting through old tools when I heard the unmistakable sound of gravel shifting. I peeked through the side window and saw Karen pacing along the edge of the lot, talking to someone on the phone. Her voice was low, frantic, barely restrained. I caught snippets. No, he can't. Already went to the board. There has to be something. She looked like a movie villain right after the evil plan collapses. I could have confronted her, but I didn't. I wanted her to stew in it, feel the boundaries closing in. 2 days later, she tried one last move. A code enforcement officer showed up at my property mid-morning, clipboard in hand, squinting at a paper as he walked across the yard. I greeted him with a smile and offered him water. He was polite, confused, said there had been a report of unauthorized surveillance equipment and illegal spikes. I asked him to wait a moment, then came back with the zoning documentation, printed ordinances, and a flash drive full of time-stamped videos, including Karen's niece attempting sabotage. He didn't even finish reviewing it all. Honestly, he said, pocketing the clipboard, this is one of the most thorough rebuttals I've ever seen. Looks like someone's trying to weaponize a complaint. Happens more than you'd think. I'll mark the case closed. No violations here. Before he left, he paused and added, Oh, and between you and me, great camera placement. The cherry on top came the next morning. A black SUV pulled into Karen's driveway, and out stepped a woman in business attire holding a large envelope. It was the county attorney's office, a civil citation for unlawful use of private land, and an investigation request into HOA fraud. I watched from my porch as Karen opened the envelope, read the papers, and slowly slumped into the patio chair like all the oxygen had drained from the world. She sat there for an hour, unmoving. Later that day, Richard stopped by. He handed me a six-pack and said, Board voted to remove her this morning. It's done. She's still allowed to live here, but she has no more authority. We're putting in term limits. Might finally fix the place. I cracked open a bottle and clinked it with his. You should run, I said. He laughed. God, no. I've got better things to do, like mow my lawn without being fined. As the sun went down, I walked across my lot one last time. The grass was starting to grow back. The wildflowers were peeking out again. The spike mats were still in place but deactivated for now. Cameras stayed, of course, not because I expected more trouble, just because I liked knowing I could catch it if it ever came again. The sign still stood at the front. Red, bold, unmistakable. And beside it, I added something new. A small wooden plaque that read, Private property. Trespassers will be posted online. It was over. But part of me hoped Karen might make one last mistake, because now I had the time, tech, and the neighborhood on my side, and I was just getting started. The following week passed with an eerie quiet, as if the entire neighborhood had exhaled all at once and was waiting to see what filled the silence. Karen's house, which once radiated a kind of manic energy, now looked like a deflated balloon after a party no one enjoyed. The fake smiles, the HOA flyers, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the sidewalks, all gone. I saw her only once during that time. She was dragging her garbage can to the curb, head down, sunglasses on, as if hiding from the world she once ruled. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My silence said more than words ever could. But even though Karen's reign was over, the fallout was far from finished. The counties still had their hands on her. Jen informed me that the civil citations were under review for escalation. If the investigators decided to pursue the case, Karen could face not only fines, but potential charges related to property fraud, false reporting, and vandalism. I hadn't even pushed the fire incident. Yet, that was still in my back pocket in case she ever got bold again. Meanwhile, I decided it was time to make some changes. The lot had been a battleground, a chessboard of pettiness and legal brinksmanship. Now I wanted to give it purpose. I started by pulling out the spike strips and storing them in the barn, just in case. Then I hired a local landscaper to help restore the native wildflowers and replant what Karen's guests had destroyed. We added a low stone path, a few benches made of reclaimed wood, and solar lights that gently lit the space at night. I didn't turn it into a guest parking lot. I turned it into a sanctuary. I also kept the cameras not because I expected more sabotage, but because the presence alone deterred future nonsense. Besides, people behaved better when they knew they were being watched. I'd learned that much. And just for fun, I left one sign still posted at the edge of the lot: cameras active, online compilation in progress. A joke, but not really. One day, while I was working on the new fence, a black truck pulled up in front of the property. Out stepped a clean-cut man in a denim jacket, holding a rolled-up blueprint tube and a clipboard. He introduced himself as Jake, a real estate developer from out of town. He said he'd seen the videos online. Turns out, someone from the neighborhood had leaked parts of the HOA drama onto a community Facebook page, and it had taken off like wildfire. Jake wasn't just a fan of petty justice. He was looking for a small parcel near town to build a short-term rental cottage, something rustic, quiet, scenic, but still close to amenities. He liked the layout of my lot, the cleared space, the privacy. He said it was perfect. I told him I hadn't thought about selling it, but I was open to offers. Then he handed me a number on a yellow notepad that made me blink. I didn't agree immediately. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I walked the lot alone under the stars. The wildflowers were just starting to bloom again. The benches looked like they'd always been there, and the place finally felt like it was mine, not just in deed, but in peace. Part of me wanted to keep it untouched forever, but another part of me remembered Uncle Ray. He always said, "Land's not about ownership. It's about stewardship. Make it better than how you found it." I knew he would have smiled at the thought of turning a battleground into something others could enjoy legally, respectfully, and with zero HOA nonsense. The next day, I called Jake and agreed to the sale, but with one condition: the deed would include a permanent clause. No HOA involvement ever. No parking rights granted to neighbors. No community agreements allowed. Independent parcel, sealed and protected. He laughed and said, "That's the easiest clause I've ever signed." Within a month, construction began. Jake brought in a small crew who respected the land and moved quietly. By summer's end, there was a charming little cedar cabin standing where Karen's guests once trampled wildflowers and dumped fast food wrappers. It had a tin roof, wraparound porch, and vintage lights hanging from the beams. I walked through it once it was finished. It smelled like fresh pine and new beginnings. Jake handed me a key and said, "Anytime you want to stay, it's yours for the weekend." Consider it thanks for inspiring half our design choices. A few days later, Karen had to drive past it for the first time. I happened to be trimming the hedges when her car slowed down. She rolled past in silence, face blank behind oversized sunglasses, gripping the wheel like it might float away if she relaxed for even a second. There was no confrontation, no tantrum, just the quiet weight of realization that she had lost everything she tried to control. The best part? The new guests who visited the cottage were respectful, quiet, and always parked on the gravel pad installed specifically for them. One of them even walked over and thanked me for the garden path, saying it was the best part of their stay. I smiled and nodded, resisting the urge to tell them the land's whole dramatic backstory. Not everyone needed to know the war that happened before the peace. But I hadn't completely let the story die. One evening, I uploaded the final video compilation to my private site. It was titled, How to Dismantle an HOA Queen. It included every highlight: the illegal signs, the sabotage attempts, the fake fines, the showdown at the board meeting, and even a before and after of the lot transformation. I didn't make it public. I didn't have to, just sent the link to Jen, Richard, and a few trusted friends from the neighborhood who had quietly supported me through the chaos. The reactions ranged from laughter to stunned silence. Richard wrote back, "If this ever hits YouTube, I'll personally buy popcorn in bulk." Eventually, the HOA voted in a new president. Someone younger, fair, and surprisingly chill. The first act they passed was to repeal half of Karen's arbitrary rules. Flower pots of all colors came back. Kids played chalk hopscotch in the driveways again. One house even put up a lawn flamingo with sunglasses and a tiny No Karen sign around its neck. Life returned to normal. No, better than normal. As for me, I kept the porch light on at the farmhouse, security cameras running just in case, and the memory of what it took to reclaim what was always mine. Not just the land, but the right to peace, privacy, and to justice. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom, it's a camera pointed at a deflating tire, a county clerk's stamp, and knowing exactly how deep to bury the spikes.